We have four discussants for you to kick off the conversation, but then we'd like to move to a question and answer session. So if you prepare your questions on the way through, I think, I don't know if you guys have a preference, but I think unless you have an urgent question of clarification on the way through, maybe hold those questions until the end. So our speakers today, first here on my left, I have David Priya, who's the co-founder and managing director of Inclusive Development. He's worked with grassroots movements around the world to hold governments, corporations and financial institutions accountable for various issues to do with development. And David's going to speak first today, particularly about two reports that he's been involved in that have recently been released on coal-fired power investments related to IFC activities. And then we have, at the far end, our second speaker will be Rivera, who's from the Philippines. He's currently the National Coordinator for the Philippine Movement for Climate Justice. And he's also worked with communities in the Philippines, Mindanao in particular, on coal-related investments. And then to his right, we have Priya Pillai from India. She's climate change lead with Greenpeace India, and she has also worked on coal issues, which is a bit of a focus for today, even though the session title is a little bit broader. She's going to speak particularly about her experience in Singuli with the coal belt there. And then from the IFC, next to Priya, we have Stein, who's the head of climate finance for IFC. So for those of you who regularly come to these events, I guess it's variations on a theme. We have done at recent annual and spring meetings sessions on the IFC's investments through financial intermediaries, so I guess some similar topics will come up today. Particular focus though is on those climate and forest issues, and particularly on the investments through financial intermediaries. So without further ado, maybe I'll hand over to David and go from there. Thanks.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Jason, for chairing today, and thank you all for joining us. I wanted to say at the outset that I am no climate expert. I work on land rights and displacement, and my esteemed colleagues on this panel are the real experts, and there's also a lot of expertise I know in this room that I hope we'll be able to tap during the discussion. But I do read the news, and I wanted to start by talking about the number 0. Because if we care about the survival of our planet, there's no more important number than that. According to a groundbreaking report that was just released by Oil Change International, 0 is now the key number in the climate fight. That's the number of new fossil fuel projects that the world can build and still keep the promises that were made in Paris to avoid a climate catastrophe. There's absolutely no margin for error. There's already enough carbon under production in the existing oil fields and coal mines to destroy the targets that were set by world leaders last year. And the World Bank understands the urgency of the situation. In 2013, the bank pledged to stop funding new coal projects except in rare circumstances. And earlier this year, Bank President Jim Kim said that building more coal plants would spell disaster for us and the planet. But is the bank group honoring that commitment? Some of you may have come to a presentation that I gave earlier this year at the spring meetings, where I discussed some of the problems surrounding IFC's financial sector investments. My organization, Inclusive Development International, had begun a research project that sought to follow the trail of IFC money through its highly opaque support for commercial banks and private equity funds, so-called financial intermediaries, down to the ground where the rubber hits the road. And the initial results of our research, which I shared in April, were quite disturbing. Through financial intermediaries, the IFC is funding a number of destructive projects around the world. We found projects in hydropower, extractives, infrastructure, and agribusiness that have caused serious adverse environmental, social, and human rights impacts and harms to communities. They've displaced hundreds of thousands of people, they've polluted the air and the oceans, they've led to serious human rights abuses. And the research shows that IFC's system for appraising, monitoring, and supervising its financial sector investments just isn't working. And it's undermining the World Bank's mission and the Sustainable Development Goals. And now we've continued this research over the past 6 months, and we're releasing our findings in a series of reports beginning this week with a report that looks at financial intermediary financing of new coal projects. And one of our most important discoveries is this. Rather than diverting money away from coal, as we know we have to do for the survival of our planet, the IFC has in fact supported a coal boom. In total, we found 41 new coal projects that have received funding from IFC financial intermediary clients since 2013, when the World Bank committed, except in rare circumstances, to no more coal. These plants account for over 56,000 megawatts of new coal capacity. Now, to put that in perspective, that's the entire coal generating capacity of Germany. Needless to say, with the new climate calculus of 0, we can't afford a new Germany's worth of coal plants in the world. As President Kim has said, that would spell disaster for us and the planet. And the projects that we found are some of the most controversial and destructive on the planet. In Bangladesh, the proposed Rampal coal plant will devastate the Sundarbans, the world's largest remaining mangrove forest. The forest is a World Heritage Site and home to endangered species. The plant could impact up to 2 million people who depend on the forest for their livelihoods. Mangroves are also an important source for carbon sequestration. They store 5 times the carbon that tropical forests do. So building Rampal will have a profound impact on global warming, which goes well beyond the carbon generated by the plant itself. According to media reports, the World Bank was approached to support the plant, but declined to do so. Obviously, because it wouldn't comply with the World Bank safeguard policies. Yet, the IFC is bankrolling Rampal through the back door. It's doing that beyond the scrutiny of the public because IFC doesn't disclose the sub-projects funded by its intermediaries. Between 2005 and 2014, we found that the IFC provided over $500 million to 6 large Indian banks. And after receiving those IFC funds, these banks went on to arrange about $7.5 billion in financing to the National Thermal Power Corporation, which co-owns this project. But it's not just Rampal. Across the border in India, the IFC is linked to some of the world's largest coal plants. These include 3 of what are known as ultra-mega coal plants. In total, they have a capacity of a staggering 12,000 megawatts. One of these plants, the Sazan ultra-mega power plant, went fully online last year, and that led to the violent forced eviction of an estimated 6,000 indigenous people, a clear violation of the IFC performance standards, which financial intermediary clients are obligated, contractually obligated, to uphold. But perhaps no project in India shows the extent of IFC's support for coal more than Mahan, 1,200 megawatt power plant that opened in 2013. Not only did IFC commercial banks provide direct project financing for the Mahan plant to the tune of $1.9 billion, but IFC's clients also provided loans and underwrote bonds for 2 companies, Hindalco and SR Power, that wanted to open up a nearby coal mine to feed the power plant. The mine would have destroyed one of the largest and oldest indigenous forests in India. It also would have displaced 54 indigenous communities. Thankfully, local communities organized themselves to resist this mine, and ultimately the government canceled the project. Priya Pillai, who's been instrumental in that fight, will tell us all about it. And we're very fortunate to have her and Ian Rivera here today to give us the perspective of communities on the front lines of the fight for climate justice. So what happened after the Mahan coal mine was deallocated? Well, SR Power looked 200 miles to the east for a new source of coal. The company bought the rights to another coal block called Takasud, and Priya can tell us about the impacts of that mine on local communities and forests. But here's the kicker. An IFC intermediary provided a loan to SR Power to support the acquisition of new coal fields, including Takasud. And that raises an important point. We've talked about the World Bank's no new coal commitment, but the bank has also made a similar commitment to preserve forests. Its 5-year forest action plan released this year aims to integrate the sustainable management of forests more fully into development decisions and define priorities for World Bank Group interventions. And that sounds wonderful, until you consider that the IFC money is being used to build dozens of massive new coal plants around the world. And those coal plants and the mines that feed them are a leading cause of deforestation. So while one arm of the World Bank seeks to preserve forests, another arm, the IFC, is funding their destruction through FI sub-projects that it won't disclose. Now, one of the things we've been hearing from IFC over the past year is that the environmental and social management of the FI portfolio is getting better. We know things weren't perfect in the past, but since 2012, when the latest version of the performance standards went into effect and IFC adopted an action plan in response to the CAO audit of the FI portfolio, IFC's appraisal and supervision of FI investments has improved markedly. And I have no doubt that it has in fact improved. But what we see, particularly when we look at the Philippines, is that the problem certainly has not been solved. In the Philippines, 2 IFC-funded commercial banks, Rizal and BDO Unibank, have funded a coal explosion in that country. Now, IFC's $100 million equity investment in Rizal Bank occurred in 2013, the year that the bank committed to no more coal. And just last year, it made another $75 million investment in Rizal Bank bonds. And since 2013, these 2 intermediaries have financed at least 20 new coal projects with a total capacity of nearly 12 gigawatts. And Ian Rivera will tell us more about the impacts these projects are having on local communities and on the activists that dare to oppose them, like Gloria Capitan. So what we've seen from the Philippines, from India, from Bangladesh, and other countries like Vietnam, where we found new coal plants financed by IFC intermediaries, IFC's financial sector lending is directly undermining the World Bank's pledge to end coal financing and to protect forests. And if the World Bank wants to honor these commitments, then the board needs to do 2 things. It needs to direct IFC to do 2 things. Firstly, it should apply its no new coal commitment to all new FI investments by adding coal to the IFC exclusion list. None of its new commercial bank or private equity clients should provide another dollar to a coal project. Secondly, IFC needs to bring its FI investments into line with the performance standards, because none of the coal projects that we found in our research are performance standards compliant. And if the banks aren't living up to their obligations, then IFC needs to exit those investments, and it needs to exit them promptly. Because if IFC doesn't take those 2 simple steps, which are consistent with the World Bank's existing commitments, then the bank group is going to be responsible for moving us farther away from zero and not closer to it. And if that happens, as President Kim said, we're finished. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We'll move straight on to Ian for your presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Ian Rivera from the Philippines, and I will be presenting about the 20 coal-fired power plant projects being funded by IFC and impacts in the communities. I will cite some of these coal-fired power plants and these communities that these are being located.
Do you want to come up here?
Yeah.
But before going to that, this is our country, and you can notice that our country is visited by typhoons and an average rate of 19 to 20 yearly, and these typhoons are getting very strong. The Philippines account for only 0.31% of the total greenhouse gas emission, but ranks among the top 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change. And we have costless typhoons and deadliest typhoons, and the major one is Typhoon Haiyan, which devastated half of our country. And that's why the occurrence of strong typhoons is now normal, as most of us would refer to that. But not only typhoons that we are experiencing, we also experience strong drought. And the last one that ended at first quarter of this year has affected 60% of our country and destroyed an estimated US $1.2 billion worth of crops and affected 23,000 families. That led to many of the farmers who were suffering from hunger, who marched to ask for support, but were met with bullets by the government. And what is really important, that the Paris Agreement committed us to a world of with a global average temperature that will not pass at 2 degrees centigrade. But for the Philippines, the aspirational of 1.5 is really important. Why so? Because when Yolanda or Typhoon Haiyan affected or ravaged our country, the average global temperature at that period is 0.87. So how much more if the average global temperature increase is 2 degrees? So what is important is the phase out of coal-fired power plants, and new energy demand should be replaced by clean and renewable energy. So that's what is really important for our country to survive. Now, aside from the climate issue, there's also a study that in 2015, according to this Harvard study, that committed an indicative coal-fired power plants, 32 all in all, are allowed to operate, it will cause the premature deaths of some of the Filipinos. And state here that around 2,410 yearly will encounter premature deaths, or double that figure. Now there is now a global impetus that many countries are now phasing out the use of coal and new demands for energy are being addressed with clean and safe renewable energy. However, this is not the case in the Philippines. Energy development relying on coal street corners financing portfolios. The reason for this is the continuous support of the international financial institutions like IFC on the coal despite the serious policy shift last 2013 that the bank will virtually stop its support for the construction of coal-fired power plants. There are now a total of 20 coal-fired power plants financed by IFC. These plants have created myriads of problems and strings of human rights issues against the Philippine communities, environmental issues, and forced the relaxation or dilution of our country's environmental standards. All in all, we have 23 operating coal-fired power plants, and 7 of these are funded by IFC. 36 coal-fired power plants are in the pipeline. 13 of these is funded by IFC. Now, if these plants will operate all in all, by 2016 to 2022, we will be locked by coal by 2030 and by 2050. And it will be very, very difficult for renewable energy to enter into the picture, because who will invest in renewable energy if all the power supply agreements are still contracted by coal-fired power plants? This is the picture where the coal-fired power plants are being located in the Philippines, unfunded by IFC. So these 3 plants here, it's in the island province of Bataan, and this is where in one coal-fired power plant where one of our climate justice activists was killed resisting the construction of the plant. Then when the plant is operational, there are lots of coal stockpiles, and these coal stockpiles created hazards and environmental and health problems in their community. So Ate Glo, as we called her, led in that struggle against this coal-fired power plant. The IFC has funded the GN Power Mariveles coal plant, which is located in the province of Bataan. The GN Power Mariveles project is a 600 megawatt coal plant that became operational in 2013. The resistance of the communities against this plant has cost the life of our fellow climate justice activists. Last July 1, exactly the day where the new Philippine president took out of office, Ate Glo was, as we usually call her, at that time was taking care of her grandkids inside her store. 2 unidentified men parked the motor vehicle near her residence. One of the men alighted and approached Kapitan, put an arm around her and shot her, took a gun and shot her on her neck. Ate Glo was very active in the fight against the Mariveles coal plant and led a series of actions and petitions for the permanent closure of the coal stockpile in their village. The residents of the barangay has seen the effects of this waste as the community experiences high morbidity of upper respiratory diseases. Ate Glo died at the age of 57, leaving her 18 kids and grandkids. So this is the coal stockpile. And the whole pier was virtually overturned to coal stockpile. And you can see at the background where the kids are playing. These are the grandkids of Ate Glo. They are just living near the coal stockpile. Another Another GN power plant, this time in the little town of Causwagan, in the province of Lanao del Norte, in the island of Mindanao, southern part of the Philippines, is also being funded by IFC. GN Power Lanao Causwagan Power Station is a 540 megawatt plant, and construction began in the late 2014. Prior to its construction, communities have blocked this coal power plant. Notable of whom are the small farmers and artisanal fisher folks of the town and the neighboring towns of Causwagan, Maego, and Kulambugan, all in Lanao del Norte province. The plant has already destroyed a 2-hectare fish sanctuary of the town, which is supposedly protected by the Philippine laws. Dislocated more than 1,000 families of farmers and fisher folks. Terrorized families who are opposed to the plant. A disqualified mayor who was responsible for the approval of the coal plant threatened all local individuals and advocates who are openly against the plant. He maintained a private army to carry out these threats and intimidations. The plant also gave way to a quarrying operation that eventually destroyed the water sources of the communities. This plant, before being constructed, they are being protested by the communities. The problem is that why these plants are being approved to be constructed. If this plant will be operational, it will affect the rich fishing grounds of Iligan and Panguil Bay. Two bays which are traditional rich fishing grounds and being bounded by 3 provinces. There are 35,000 artisanal fisher folks and families who depend their livelihood in these 2 fishing grounds. The Panguil Bay alone has a water area of 18,000 hectares. The total catchment of the area is 309,000 hectares. You can notice there, that's the Panguil Bay and Iligan Bay. The red dot, that's where the coal-fired power plant is being constructed. So this is the quarrying that resulted to the destruction of their water sources. Now I will move on to another coal-fired power plant. This time, this is in Sarangani, also funded by IFC. The Sarangani coal-fired power plant, this is in the southernmost tip of Mindanao, is located in Maasin. It is a 210 megawatt coal-fired facility and expected to be operational by 2018. The coal plant has displaced more than 500 indigenous people families of the Pillai tribe. From their ancestral lands. The plant is constructed right in front of the protected Sarangani seascape, which is also protected under the Philippine laws. So this is the Sarangani Bay, and this is the protected seascape. This is the picture where the plant is not yet constructed. This is the picture now of the plant, and right above it is the Sarangani Bay. So it dislocated the Bilaan tribe, and sources of livelihood has long been threatened, and deprivation and hunger have stalked their daily existence. Another IFC-funded coal plant is in the island of Mindanao that has been operating last 2015. It's a Davao Thermal Power Station. It's a 645 megawatt coal-fired power plant. The first phase, which consists of 150 megawatts, was completed in February 2016, and 2 additional units are still being constructed. So there are many issues in this plant that it encountered when approval was sought. Despite the strong opposition of the people from Davao City, the City Council approved this power plant. The plant is right in front of Davao Gulf, which is also a traditional fishing ground of 2 provinces. So currently, since the plant is already there, It has affected the residents of 3 barangays, Barangay Binugaw, Inayawan, and Sirawan. Close to 67,000 residents are living in these 3 barangays. The ancestral land of a Muslim tribe of Kalagan has been forcibly taken by the power plant, and hundreds of artisanal fisher folks can no longer fish in the municipal waters, while residents are complaining of depletion of water table and increase of respiratory infections. I don't need to go on to the other 15 coal-fired power plants because these are the same issues that we will keep on talking about. I will be presenting what are the position of the Filipino communities affected by this power plant. So the Filipino communities living near these coal plants wanted this plant stopped. We are working with these communities in these 20 coal-fired power plants. They have no place to go, and their history is in these places. The communities have already felt the obstacle, the observable impacts these plants have caused them. And if these plants are allowed to operate, based on the Harvard study that I mentioned a while ago, it will increase the untimely deaths of the communities that are near these coal-fired power plants. Imagine these 29 new coal power plants with a total capacity of 11,700 megawatts, which could dramatically increase levels of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, and the PM 2.5 emissions. Of the 23 coal plants existing and operating in the Philippines, 7 out of 23 is funded by IFC, while 14 out of 36 are in the pipeline and are due to operate between now and 2022. This is our huge problem. If these plants will operate, aside from the problem of locking our country into coal, these plants will create hazards and affect the health of the communities. While this staggering data, given this staggering data, that we Filipinos can only say that the bank is not only funding the climate crisis, but also the Philippines, burning the Philippines' future. So we are calling that the bank to stop funding the coal-fired power plants in the Philippines and to stop financing the climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll shift straight on to Priya and move to India for her to speak about the experience there.
A very good afternoon to all of you. So, before I go into the ground realities of what's happening in Singrauli in Madhya Pradesh, in the Mahan power plant and that region, I would like to basically just set the context by talking about the climate change issues. While India is definitely seen as one of the problem creators globally, we also happen to be one of the countries that is facing drastically and has to adapt drastically to climate change in different parts of the country. While in the Paris Agreement, we have committed, we've made some big commitments on the INDC front, basically trying to push ourselves more to deliver on the renewables front. But if you look at the energy mix of the country, you will find that we still rely on more than almost 60% of our energy comes from coal-based thermal power plants. That is the larger share of energy, in the energy mix. That's the share of coal. Whereas renewables still continue to be a dismal less than 11% of the share. So while we commit to an increased, push towards renewables, It is definitely going to be a big challenge to work with the Indian government, to push the government to phase out coal and to transition to renewables. So in that background, if you look at the whole scenario, I would like to share more about Mahan, but the entire Central Indian belt also. Why this entire Central Indian belt is important for us is because this is where 80% of the coal in the country lies. This is the largest coal-bearing area in the country. It has 5 states of India, which has Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, Maharashtra. So this area is where all the coal is. Incidentally, this is also the area where all the forest is. So while we are trying to mine out all the coal and burn and create carbon emissions, we are also in that process cutting down carbon sinks. So there is a double impact on the climate. The climate gets a double hit from that angle. This is also a very biodiverse rich area because it's highly forested. It's home to a large number of indigenous communities in India who roughly make almost 8% of the total population of the country. And when we are saying 8% of Indian population, it's huge because we are the second most largest populated country in the world. So the Central Indian belt becomes very important for us because that's where all the mines are, and that's where I think a lot of IFC investments are also being pushed through in the recent years. To talk about Singrauli, Singrauli is just a case in point. So before I go into the details of Singrauli, I really want to say that the Mahan case or Singrauli as a region is just one example of, and it's representative of the entire Central Indian coal-bearing belt. You go to Chhattisgarh, you go to Jharkhand, you go to Orissa, any of the regions where coal mining is there, you will find that the realities on the ground are very similar to what is going to be presented. Even the tactics used by the companies on the ground are so similar. You will actually find that it's the same, like the same kinds of forgeries, the same kinds of human rights violations, the same kinds of EIAs. Even the companies or the consultants who pull together the EIAs are the same. And we know there are a bunch of companies who write EIA documents for them, and it's the same group. So you will find that what happens on the ground is also like it gets duplicated in each of these regions. So Mahan, when I tell you the Mahan story, this is not just the story in Mahan, it's the story of the entire Central Indian coal belt for that matter. So Singrauli basically is one of the industrial clusters in the Central Indian belt. It produces 10% of the total coal-based energy of the country. And though it produces 10% of the coal-based energy, this is also a region that struggles with access. The region itself, you will find that a large number of villages do not have access to energy. So the energy that's produced in this region essentially is siphoned off to the cities and the industries. And that's one of the realities of Singrauli. It's also a critically polluted region. It's the 3rd most polluted industrial cluster, according to the Central Environment Pollution Index. And because it was critically polluted, it used to be the 7th most polluted industrial cluster almost 5 to 7 years ago. And there was a moratorium on mining when it was put on the 7th on the scale. But then that moratorium was lifted because to basically attract more coal investments in the region. And now it's the 3rd most polluted industrial cluster, and with the moratorium lifted. This entire region is housed to the Asia's largest sal forest. They are an indigenous species which cannot be, you cannot plant it. It's a naturally growing indigenous species. It's the largest variety, it's got the largest sal forest in Asia. This region has also been highlighted because of mercury contamination. The Center for Science and Environment came out with a very strong study to show that this region has a high incidence of mercury contamination because this one district has 11 mines and 9 thermal power plants. And in this region, in the study that was conducted, in almost 84% of the cases, the level of mercury contamination was seen to be 6 times more than the permissible limits. So this is basically the region for you. I won't go into the slide because David has already gone into the discussion of the IFC investments in the region, which was both for the mine as well as for the plant. In terms of, so there was the plant, to talk about the history of the region, the plant was first proposed. When the plant was first proposed in the region, what was happening was that what they do is there is no cumulative impact assessment or a holistic way of looking at impact or studying impacts of coal mining on communities, on the environment, on the hydrological system of the region or anything. What they do is a piecemeal job. So you first basically get all clearances for the mine, and then the mine came into existence, and the mine came into existence somewhere around 2008-9. When land acquisition happened with the mine, there was like a lot of violence when land acquisition happened because it was forced eviction, and almost 108 people were slapped with multiple cases, false cases. People had to flee their homes for months in order to not get arrested. There was the company offices were burnt down by people. There was lathi charge on people and all kinds of issues there. But that was sorted out. They went ahead with the investment and built the thermal power plant. At that time, there was no talk of the mine at all. Years later, after the investment had moved quite a bit, that was when the mine came into the picture. Now, again, an IFC, indirect investment. The mine was basically a joint venture of SR and Hindalco, and the mine was just 5 kilometers away from the plant in the forest. And this is the Sal forest. It's a dry deciduous forest, and this entire region, it was 1,182 hectares of forest land that was proposed to be diverted for the mine, and this entire patch of forest was basically the entire thing was that the process is followed. There was no public hearing to begin with, because for any proposed project you have to have a public hearing. There was no public hearing for this project. On paper, of course, there was a public hearing, but in reality there was no public hearing. Then if you look at each of the other processes, the EIA document, if you read it, it's a very interesting document. It talks about a lot of violations biodiversity laws and laws on how the water levels would go down and stuff like that. But it was not taken into it. And when this clearance process was started, the committee that was in the Ministry of Environment and Forest that was giving clearance, the advisory board, denied clearance 4 times. But despite this, the empowered group of ministers went ahead and gave clearance to it as a special case. And the stage 1 clearance was granted to this mine. When the stage 1 clearance was given to this mine, it was based on a forged document. There was a lot of violation of a lot of domestic laws, the Forest Rights Act being the major law. So this region has a lot of indigenous communities, and this is home to indigenous communities, and the Forest Rights Act basically gives them a lot of rights which in the forest. So basically there's community forest rights in the region, which was denied to the community because there was a proposed mine. So the government denied them community rights, saying that a mine is going to come here, so you don't get your rights. There is a process of taking consent of communities, free and prior informed consent for diversion of forest land for non-forest use. Again, in that process also there was a forgery committed. The village council resolution that was obtained falsely. It was forged basically. The village council did not happen, but there was a resolution on paper, based on which the stage 2 clearance was granted to the mine with 32 conditions. Now, after that, there was there was this forgery, and then what happened was there was a lot of false cases and slap suits that were basically initiated against communities who were protesting and fighting against the mine. So this was the process that was followed by Mahan Coal Limited to try and get the mine, but the community was very committed to push back, and they were successful after fighting for 5.5 years. They were successful in March 2015. They were able to get the mine deallocated. But that was just the mine. The plant continues there even now. It's the same company, it's the same Mahan Coal Limited, funded by IFC. It's the same joint venture that is functioning out there. Inside the mine, you will find that inside the plant, you will find that there's the same violations that you see vis-a-vis the mine, because it's the same company, it's the same group of people who are operating on the ground. So there is a fly ash pond. I'm just going to show you. Yeah, this is it. So if you look at this image, that's the fly ash pond, which breaches every monsoon. So every monsoon, this fly ash pond just breaches and flows into the villages. So there are 4 villages who were displaced by the thermal power plant, and they are housed in a colony, a displaced colony called Nagwa, which is like a barren, rocky patch of land, which has got matchbox-like houses, which are yellow, painted in yellow. And that is where these people are. There are no drinking water facilities. They have to come to the other side, to the villages where the mine was proposed, to get water for themselves, because there's no water in the displaced colony. Though jobs were promised, schools were promised, hospitals were promised, none of this ever came there. There is, of course, a hospital building in the colony, in the displacement colony, but there are no facilities for it. There are no schools. The schools have been outsourced to some group which doesn't run the school at all. This fly ash pond breaches every year. So every monsoon this breaches, and it just flows into the village, into the fields, destroying crops. Last year, almost 60 the slurry just washed into almost 60 houses, and people had to move out of their houses. They had to literally run out of their houses with whatever they could just pick up, because there was this fly ash slurry just coming on them. And the company or the authorities did not do anything. After weeks, when things dried up, people themselves went and cleaned up their houses, and they moved back into that position. And what the company did was, because we had put in a complaint before the Pollution Control Board, what the project proponents did was, basically they covered the entire region where the fly ash was there with mud. They just brought truckloads of mud and covered it there. And they wouldn't allow anybody to dig below it and show. So they would bring in the authorities to look at, the violations. No photography was allowed there. They put a board there saying no photography allowed in this region. So and this happens every year during the monsoons, and nothing really is done about it. So this has become just part of the lives of the people in that region. The violations in terms of threats continue on community members. What they get, they've lost their livelihoods, because the 4 villages that were displaced used to basically earn their livelihoods from the forest, but since part of the forest has been cut down and they've been displaced, they do not have jobs. And what they do is they get a meager amount of unemployment allowance from the company. And that too, there are a lot of the real people who should get the allowance don't end up not getting it. There are people who live outside the region who've been registered as people who were living there. They are the ones who are getting the unemployment allowances. So there's all kinds of issues on the ground. There is one entire village whose land was acquired 5 years ago. There is a law in India which says that if your land is acquired and possession is not taken for 5 years, your land will revert back to you. So the community now is actually trying to move the courts to get their land back, because they believe that they really don't want the plant there. They really think. Apart from this, right now, what Mahan Coal Limited is getting coal, they are buying coal from northern coalfields. So there are almost 1,000 trucks that ply through the village roads every day that brings coal from outside Singrauli into the plant, so that the plant is operational. And like in the recent months, we've been seeing the number of accidents on those roads increasing because these are huge trucks, you know, they just drive, zoom past these roads. So, and there have been so many accidents, but there is no accountability. Nobody takes, you know, any cognizance of what is happening on that road. That is also something that the community has been really, really bothered about. So the community continues to fight against most of these issues on the ground. As the coal plant now is trying to get another mine in Jharkhand, which is our neighboring state, which is one of the other central Indian states. Now again this mine, that Tokisud mine that they are proposing to get in Jharkhand is also in a forested area. It is also going to displace communities, and more than displacing communities, it is again going to violate Forest Rights Act because that forest also has community rights in it. There are villages in and around that forest who have rights in, you know, indigenous communities whose rights are in those forests. When that forest is cut down, it's the livelihoods of those communities again who are going to be impacted and affected. So, like, you will see that the same thing is getting repeated. The plant, when the plant was established, you see a series of things. The mine tried to do the same thing in the vicinity. Of course, we fought it and it's deallocated. But now the mine is moved into another geography where it's trying to do, like, it's the same set of violations that the company is engaging in. And all of this is not like it's well documented, it's quite publicized. The Mahan fight was one of the most publicized fights in India. It's not like nobody knows about it. So all these violations are well known, yet they continue to be supported, they continue to be funded for these violations. And I think it's high time we kind of take into account some of these very strong human rights, environmental violations that are happening over and over and over again in the region, and we learn some lessons about from this. And more importantly, it's from the climate change perspective. The IFC investments in the entire central Indian belt is not something that's welcome, because if we continue to lock ourselves into this dirty technology, then we don't see India moving out of coal and transitioning into renewables. Thank you.
Thanks, Priya. Because we started late and because I haven't been chairing the meeting very well, we're running behind time. So, Priya, maybe if I can ask you to talk a little bit about the work the IFC is doing in financing climate-related projects. But we'll try to, we've got the room until 2 o'clock, right?
3 o'clock.
3, oh, okay. Sorry, 3 o'clock. So try to leave sort of at least 15 to 20 minutes for questions. So if you can get to within 5 or 10 minutes, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I will keep it short. So I was asked to talk about what we do in climate. Of course, there's a number of questions here with very specific relevance both in the Philippines and India. Now that I have a couple of colleagues in my room who can, of course, also speak to this, and they will try to respond and go to this if you want to as well. But Felipe, who's here from our environmental social side, can certainly talk about the performance standards, and then Dan, who's leading our work on the follow-up to how we work with financial intermediaries on performance standards, can certainly speak to this as well. Now, what it tells me, since I'm in charge of what we do in climate finance, is that we still have a lot of issues, not just in our portfolio, but also in the countries that we operate, about how the climate commitments that have been made in Paris are indeed being implemented, right? I mean, we have had a great show of hands in terms of the INDCs last year, and some of them were more specific and precise than others, but it certainly it tells us that there's a lot more work that needs to get done in order to really put them in practice, because at the end of the day, financial institutions have a responsibility to finance the right projects, but they are also, of course, part of the fabric of the economy, and so whatever's possible and feasible in the economy is what will drive business for financial institutions. So if we have fossil fuel subsidies that are still existing in a country and that basically make coal and other fossil fuel generation and give them an unfair advantage, then of course that will have an impact as to what can be financed. Similarly, you've heard our president of the World Bank talk about it, putting a price on carbon. Now is certainly high time. There's a lot of work that is happening, but a lot of this has not yet progressed at the pace that we wanted to. Right? There's some large markets that have made commitments into that direction, and China's probably one of them that seems fairly committed to put that in place in 2017. But there's certainly still a lot more that's needed. And then the third point, besides eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, putting a price on carbon, is certainly putting the right incentives in place for, in particular for renewable energy in public-private partnerships, so that indeed they can be put forward and it can be done in a meaningful way. You may be familiar with IFC Scaling Solar Initiative, which is about simplifying the process of putting forward solar-based projects in emerging markets with great success. In Zambia, we were able to get to, comparably for other solar projects in other regions, still high, but quite cheap in the context of Zambia, 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour, all included for a very long time. And that certainly helps to simplify those processes. But coming to what we do through financial intermediaries. So certainly the World Bank Group has set itself a very ambitious target when it comes to climate finance. We want to grow our commitments to 28% of total commitments. We're leading in a number of global fora on carbon pricing, on eliminating fossil fuel subsidies, on supporting the development of real and binding INDCs at the national level. And we certainly want to make sure that within the context of this ambitious climate action plan, we put financial markets to work. And that certainly is not an easy task, but what we've seen so far is that it seems to be going at least into the right direction at different levels. So IFC got involved working with financial intermediaries 20 years ago to help them build businesses for energy efficiency finance in Eastern Europe. It started in Hungary, then moved to a number of Eastern European countries, and we have since then taken this across regions and across clients. So we've worked since with about 140 financial intermediaries across almost half of the countries that we operate in, to really build this as a business. And it's not so easy to build. And certainly 20 years ago it wasn't that easy to build because the economics were not necessarily always in favor of energy efficiency. Now it has become a lot better, both when it comes to energy efficiency and renewable energy, so we see a lot more traction today. When we surveyed our clients, 71% of them said that they are active in climate finance. And the top categories that they are active in are renewable energy finance, energy efficiency finance, and then green buildings, waste management, and other projects that relate to this. So it's clearly an area that is growing within the portfolios of our banks, and it's clearly an area that we are growing at the financial institution level. Now, one of the issues that we often face is that banks typically don't like to be first movers. Banks are typically good at being followers. I mean, if they see that someone else does it properly, then they're more likely to do it as well. But they typically don't necessarily like to innovate, and that comes from a number of different reasons. They have to take care of the savings that people put into the bank, and so they obviously don't want to put that at risk. So if you can show them business models that work, then typically they take that into consideration as well. So in addition to working with individual financial institutions, we are also intervening at the market level. So in 2012, we helped set up the Sustainable Banking Network with 10 founding members, including China, Vietnam, Nigeria, Brazil, Peru, which comprises largely regulators, but also banking associations that are committed to advancing sustainable financial standards. And these can either be regulatory, which is our preference because they have more teeth, all voluntary if they are driven by banking associations. So today this network has 26 has 26 countries, and there can be either regulators or banking associations as members, and 12 of those countries have since passed either voluntary or regulatory standards that both address the risk side, so environmental, social, governance risk that a lot of the projects you talked about have to address, as well as in many cases also the opportunity side, so basically help banks see where financing needs to be mobilized for renewable energy financing, for better resource efficiency, energy efficiency savings, new forms of mobility that take that into consideration, climate smart agriculture, and so on. So in addition to working at the financial institution level, where we help banks and other financial institutions build the business in climate finance, as well as the intervention at the national level, where we want to raise standards for all of the financial intermediaries. We are also engaged at the global level, and there, of course, after COP21, I think the most notable initiatives are that the Financial Stability Board, which kind of brings all of the regulators together around financial risk, has kicked off the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, which is meant to provide a final report to the FSB actually very soon, end of October, beginning of November, and which the Germans, as the G20 presidents, will also pick up during the presidency to see how that can be then implemented, because that would, in most likely, or likely, would have very wide-ranging implications, because any of those standards that the FSB typically puts forward now become very quickly binding for the financial services industry. So that's certainly an area that we've been following and supporting very closely from the beginning. The second area at the global level that I think is a very promising one is the work that the G20 started on the Green Finance Study Group. And from my vantage point, it's very promising because it's led by the Ministers of Finance and Governors who are in charge of the financial sector. And they've come out with a synthesis report with 7 recommendations that were endorsed at the Hangzhou summit that I think were reasonably far-reaching in terms of the commitments that have been made, and which was co-chaired by China as well as England in this particular case. And then the last point is how the global capital markets, institutional investors are being put to work. And here, clearly the most promising development is the development of the green bond market, which has been a niche market for, I would say, the last 5 years, but has really taken off last year and this year, where it is broadening much more. The standards are getting tighter, so the ICMA, which is the International Capital Markets Association, which sets standards for green bonds, just released kind of another set of those that are a bit tighter than the previous one. The Climate Bonds Initiative, which is an NGO focused on verification of climate bonds, has also added additional standards for certain industries. And so this year alone, in the first half of this year, we had over $50 billion in issuance, which is more than all of last year combined. So I think we're on good track towards also seeing this working more. The IFC works actually very closely with our financial intermediaries as well to help them issue green bonds, because they do have certain advantages. So when it comes to the question of performance standards and tracking a green bond, typically you have to report on the underlying assets that are being financed, and you have to report on the impact as well, right, with respect to energy saved, or greenhouse gases saved, and so on. And you need to have a second opinion that validates that. So there's some advantages to leveraging capital markets in this space as well. Now, I'm mindful of the time. You said you need 15 minutes for questions and answers. So, and now, I don't know how you want to go forward, but as I said, if you want more specific kind of conversation around some of the cases here, then you can certainly address that as well. Okay,
Thank you, Priya. I think there are some things here that we've heard today that everyone in the room would agree on, and there's some things that are more contentious. So I think Ian's description of the impacts of climate change in the Philippines are very profound, and it's something we're certainly dealing with in the countries in my constituency where mitigation's a nice idea, but really we're already dealing with profound adaptation issues. So we're already at the point where we're dealing with climate change. And I think the impacts of coal-fired power stations on both availability of other resources and the other impacts on communities are things that we all agree on. And in fact, as we've talked about, President Kim and the World Bank's policy statements actually recognise that, and that's why we don't directly invest in coal-fired power anymore. But the point that David raised is, when you follow the money through some of these indirect investments, you can reach, through financial intermediaries, you can reach investments that wouldn't be allowed through the direct investment rules. So what does that mean for how we monitor these things? Priya talked about the positive agenda, about the commitments that the bank's made in COP21 and how the IFC is operationalising those, and things like regulation and voluntary regulation to improve standards and to establish market incentives for people to invest in renewables. So I think that's something we all agree on as well. So do I have any questions for the speakers now on any of these issues? One over here to start. We've got a microphone here.
Hi, my name is Anup. I am here from behalf of Climate Action Network International. Work on sustainable finance. My question would be to IFC board and climate finance head here. We in all the conversations that I've been seeing here, we're devoting a lot of our time to coal, and that's justifiable. But there's also oil and gas. And if any of these is left behind in terms of financing and exclusion, that's enough for us to go past the 2-degree goal, forget even 1.5C. So my interest would be to hear how the bank group is planning to integrate any kind of fossil fuel exclusion in all the activities, especially seeing that the siloed or the compartmentalized approach by, say, classifying some amount of finance as climate finance, and then rest amount of finance as development, and then another is infrastructure. So this siloed approach is not really helping, because we will still find some of the project pipelines coming up on some of these fossil fuels, especially when we are seeing international global financial institutions moving towards a regime where a lot of the decisions are being left on the borrowing countries or the clients, including the safeguards or the kind of project pipelines that they develop. And we've also heard saying that if the project borrowing countries want it, then we provide it. So that's not a very encouraging scenario, especially when global financial institutions need to lead the transition towards a low carbon and sustainable economy. We understand economies need to function, but the way economies have functioned in the past 2 centuries is not really going to lead us to where communities need to go. And I think the agenda of the global financial institutions is not just about driving markets, but also ensuring that markets can function in a very stable and a long-term manner. And stability is being questioned right now because of climate impacts, because of stranded assets, because of the very kind of investments that we're making in infrastructure and energy, very quickly becoming out of productivity and returns, especially because of the upcoming concerns. And your own group studies are saying that. It's not that I'm picking up these words from anywhere else. So overarching sentiment needs to be about time sensitivity. We do not really have a lifetime to do this because the time window, whether you look at it from the carbon budget perspective or water security perspective, a lot of the coal power plants were not really functioning in India for a while because there was drought happening. So these are real concerns, and since the time window is really closing fast, how is a global institution like yours thinking really deep and hard on this is what I would be interested in.
Anyone else, or do we want to go straight to the next one?
me, feel free to jump in.
After you.
So, no, I mean, in our energy directions paper, we clearly outlined that no, we are not doing coal except in very, 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 very special circumstances. Now, on the oil and gas side, gas, I think we do recognize as no, still having a role to play in the transition path to no, the climate targets that we've set for ourselves. Oil poses, I think, a different set of questions, right? Because so many things depend on oil in our economy, right? That it's not just linked to energy, but it's linked to a lot of things that we have, that we're wearing, that go into our computers and are a little bit everywhere. So that's clearly an area that no, I don't think at this stage we'd be prepared to put on an exclusion list, right? Because a lot of things need to happen in the economies that we live in before we could probably argue that that is the case. Now, looking for alternatives and opening up alternatives for financing that would avoid investments in those areas, absolutely, right? I mean, so this comes back to making it simpler to have PPPs for solar power plants, right? By having out-of-the-box scaling solar as an approach to this, showing the advantages given where we are already in terms of the average cost of many of those recent PPP transactions, whether they're in Mexico or in the UAE, where we are talking about 3-4 cents a kilowatt hour now, and also pointing to the speed of realizing those, I think is, because they can be done in 12-18 months, as we are showing, is clearly an advantage, and I think that should hopefully help. But maybe I should also go to Jason for your view as well.
Yeah, I suspect I'm not going to entirely satisfy you in my answer, but let me answer as best I can. And I think your point about it's not just about driving markets, it's about stability. The other word we use is sustainability. And I think our understanding at the World Bank and in the economics profession more broadly about what sustainability means has moved ahead in leaps and bounds in the past 20 years. And that goes to the issue of climate change. It also goes to other areas. And I think there are some, well, I can say there are some very strong voices on the World Bank board that every project that comes before us talk about the sustainability side of things. And I think climate change is one of those. On our ability, increasing use of national systems through things like, I know the IFC have their new safeguards from a few years ago, but the new safeguards on the World Bank side is a particular issue. I think, again, our constituency of small countries, we're very concerned about the capacity of countries to implement safeguards, and we think it's very important that the bank provides the resources to those countries to satisfy ourselves that when national systems are being used, that is implementing safeguards properly. So I think that another part of your question is something that's very important to us as well.
Can I just add just one quick point, right, about sustainability and stability. So I believe that this is coming together very quickly, right? I mean, so when I was referring to the climate-related task force, on the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, no, I mean, these are real risks that the financial sector, when it comes to oil, gas, and coal, has to face, right? I mean, so, and there's three main risks, right? One is about the physical assets, right? And that relates to, obviously, the impact of climate change itself. There's legal liabilities that you may be facing because you have been financing things that are detrimental to the future of our generations. And the third one, that you are dealing with stranded assets, right? I mean, so when you realize that they have to be shut off. And so this is why I believe that work is so critical over the next 18 months, what is being done here, because that can tilt a little bit more that direction, which we've already seen in voluntary alliances, right? I mean, the decarbonization coalition, and where institutional investors have made commitments for their portfolios to be decarbonized and so on. But I think this could be potentially much more sweeping, much broader in terms of the signal that it will send. And I think sustainability and stability will see much more of an interlocking at that level, because it goes to the core of financial sector regulations.
Okay, Okay, I think we've got 2 questions at the microphone and 1 in the room. Come here, please.
I'm Paul van Rood from Triple 11. Something I don't get, I don't really get. You say, okay, this oil we have to continue because many things, etc. Whereas the International Energy Agency, the IPCC, they all say 75 to 85% of the present existing reserves of fossil fuel you have to put into the ground. And on the other hand, we see that IFC has funded in the past last years also exploration of finding new fossil fuels. It all sounds a little bit unrealistic to keep on investing that much in fossil fuels, where on the other hand, it's being said if you want to get to 2 degrees, then you have to leave most of it in the ground. So could you shine a light on that contradiction in my head? Thank you.
For time, maybe if we take another question.
Sure, thank you. Luis Rivera with the Bretton Woods Project. Given the presentations, I think I'd be very interested to hear from yourself as head of the climate unit on how do you react to the presentations, because you haven't really taken an opportunity to address the issues raised, and particularly vis-a-vis, I think there are 2 substantial issues, right? One which deals with climate change and the obvious contradiction between what IFC is doing through its investments in its FIs, which are supporting these projects, and also the other issue that's maybe not related to this theme specifically, but the other impacts that are negative as well. So as head of the unit, I mean, do you accept these findings and do you accept that they represent a problem? And how will you begin to try to deal with these issues? And finally, my last part of my question relates to, do you accept the recommendations made by IDI or the panel? And if you don't, could you shed some light as to why not? Thank you.
Sorry, Nicole, do you want?
Hello, Nicole Gio with the Sierra Club. In one of your responses, you mentioned that the World Bank is not funding coal, and I hope that's true. There are a number of projects at the coast of a coal plant that are still being considered, but it's clear from this panel and from the roundtable yesterday that the IFC still has a very large exposure to coal through these financial intermediaries that the IFC is oftentimes, it seems, not even necessarily aware of until we spent a large amount of money, did a lot of research, and brought it to you. So how are you going to rectify this exposure to coal through financial intermediaries with the World Bank policies to limit support for coal to these rare circumstances where no alternative exists in the world's poorest countries?
My question actually follows directly on from that. Is there going to be a push to ensure that the financial intermediaries are obliged to use standards internally that match the performance standards, which are very well respected?
Okay, I'll do this in 60 seconds. I may need, Felipe and Aaron, if you want to jump in, I'll give it a first shot. So starting with the last, our financial institutions are required, so our performance standards apply to our business, and as such they apply to our financial intermediaries as well. Now in the terms of the financing that we provide, they may be applied in different forms, right? If we provide just a trade finance line, or if we invest in equity, there's different levels of engagement that we have, and also different levels of visibility that we have with our clients, right? So to the questions about the report, obviously we take them seriously, otherwise we wouldn't be here. We will follow up on those, because at least in one case there was documented where we know indeed that the financing relationships apply, our performance standards need to apply. So we are following up on those, and we'll certainly see but we have to do our work, of course, from our side as well to see what our clients tell us, and then we'll, of course, also go back. Now, are we going to put coal on an exclusion list for IFC? Certainly we heard the message loud and clear. So, and that's clearly a debate that is already ongoing, right? I can't yet give you an answer to this because that is not just my call. But we definitely got the message, so thank you on this one. On the part about the fossil fuels investments versus renewable or climate-related investments, I mean, you'll definitely see, and I don't have the numbers right now in front of me, but we're happy to pick that out, that now you'll see now an upward trend of what we're doing in climate finance, right? I mentioned to you that we're currently at around 20%, we want to grow this to 28%. I think on the financial institution side, we have a much steeper curve ahead of us. We want to quadruple that now over the next 4 or 5 years, while our direct exposures on the oil and gas side, I mean, Aaron, maybe you can talk to this, have not necessarily been on a steep upwards trend, right, and are very, very selective. I mean, coming back to the point that I mentioned earlier, we clearly see still gas as technology that has a role to play, and oil has different uses as well, right, that we need to keep in mind as well.
We had a small follow-up question.
Just sorry, I can't help myself but to press you a bit. So, understanding that no decision has been taken on the exclusion of coal, can you shed some light on what the rationale would be not to exclude it? Given if the World Bank Group, as an entity, has a no coal policy,
Right.
when you're sitting around the table debating whether coal should be excluded from financial intermediary support, what are the arguments made? I'm not going to even ask you where you sit personally on the arguments, but what are the arguments made that would present a contrary position that would imply a non-exclusion of coal?
If you want to take this.
Then you have to take the microphone. Sure. I mean, I think, look, like it or not, the energy direction paper doesn't prohibit coal. It's not a ban on coal. So let's be honest about that from the get-go. I think it's a debate, as Jason pointed out, that we see at the board a lot for countries that are not there yet. I think it's going to be, to get to where we want to be, has to be a combination of things, right? And certainly, obviously, examination of policies will be one of those things. But also, you have to see demand. We have to respond to our client countries, and they've got to play this out amongst themselves and give us that direction. So I mean, that's something that's reality, right? We talked a little bit about different views on even transition, and that's also something that we have to bear in mind and deal with. Just one point you said on the oil and gas. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look over time, the portfolio is going down in the areas that the market is getting there. It is taking more time in some countries than others. The overall trend is upward, but not as fast as everyone would like, obviously, but it is getting better. Several years ago, I would say, and you can probably comment on this too, one of the biggest issues is demand. We can put all these green products out in the marketplace, and if people aren't buying them, or banks aren't taking them up and selling them to their customers, then where are we? So that, thankfully, I think today the situation is much better than it used to be years ago, and there's actually a lot of green finance products in the marketplace. So it's got to be that combination of policy and market incentives that gets us, I think, to where you want to be. So.
Thanks. I'm going to okay, really quick one.
Nothing new, just building on this. So we know that there is a global momentum towards countries being asked to develop long-term decarbonization strategies, right? Would the World Bank Group be interested in coming out with its own portfolio decarbonization strategy that is supplementary, complementary to what the governments are doing? I understand that you're looking at signals from governments, but would you be voluntarily interested in coming out with your own long-term decarbonization strategy, a PDP, portfolio decarbonization plan, or something on those lines? And because I see there is mutual benefit in doing that. The governments are also thinking about it, and global institutions like ours.
I think, so we haven't really talked about that yet, is the honest answer, and the President's commitment to 28% of our portfolio in this area, and his clear statements that climate change is a very important global issue that the bank needs to be involved in. We haven't put full flesh around what that means for the bank. We have the climate action plan and that's part of it, but there are so many other parts that we're going to have to deal with, and that idea sounds good. We have certainly said that we need to be more involved in working with member countries on their commitments and plans to decarbonise, so that's something we've done. But maybe what you're saying is a logical extension of that. So, but the honest answer is we haven't really put the flesh on the bones yet. We started with David, and I'm going to pass over to him to conclude. Can I give my apologies to Bharat, who's here in the audience? He has experience with the Tata Mundra project in India, and unfortunately we've run out of time, but for those of you who want to speak to him to hear more about that experience, please do.
Yeah, it's just to Aaron. Yes, you have to respond to your country constituencies and clients, but the world made a commitment to 1.5 degrees centigrade in Paris last year. Dozens and dozens of world leaders committed to that, and IFC has a responsibility to move that agenda forward. Half of your constituents are going to be underwater if we don't achieve those commitments. So if President Kim wants IFC to be the leader and lead the way to the greening of the financial sector, there is no alternative to adding fossil fuels and coal to the exclusion list for new financial intermediary investments. For the existing investments, I think it's important to point out that there's a dozen or more coal projects in the pipeline in the Philippines that we talked about today that haven't been built yet. Companies that have been financed by banks that you hold equity in, that you have seats on the board of. Those projects can be stopped. The Rampal coal project, one of the biggest disasters that we can think of, disastrous projects. All of these projects are completely failing to comply with your performance standards, with your environmental and social requirements. So if the sustainability framework means anything, if it's worth the paper that it's printed on, then you need to bang some heads together and stop those projects, or you need to exit those investments. There's no two ways about it. Those are your only options. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you all for coming along today. That was a good discussion, and as I said, variations on a theme. So really, we're from different angles tackling this issue of financial intermediaries, but at the core there's a problem or an issue that people are raising that we obviously need to talk about more. One thing David didn't mention, but he mentioned to me before the discussion, is maybe there are things the IFC and the bank group can learn from other development institutions as well that we can also talk about. But thank you all for coming in. I appreciate your participation.